everybody, welcome. We're going to let everyone jump in here to the webinar and we'll get started in just a minute. Welcome everybody. As you are joining in, we'll get started in just a minute, letting all the attendees hop into the webinar. As we're waiting, I'm curious if you will post in the chat, what does IP mean, those letters? Awesome. Welcome, Annalisa. Welcome. I'm going to give it just 2 more minutes, let people hop in here. Gary, how is the weather in where you are?
You know, it's super sunny today, but last night we had a storm pop. This never happens. A storm blew through where I'm in Orange County, California. It blew through Orange County. Thunderstorms. We got hail, winds, heavy rain. It was amazing. We never get that. So, and now it's gone. It's beautiful outside.
You've got sunny weather. Annalisa has sunny weather. Pam, how's the weather at your house?
So I'm in New Jersey.
Okay.
And 2 days ago, I walked out to my car. It was 18 degrees and my car doors were frozen shut, which I sent to all my family that's in California so they could laugh at me.
You're funny.
But today we will be 45 and I'm going out in just a sweatshirt.
Where I am, it's 46 right now, so I'm very much enjoying it. I'm in the mountains of North Carolina.
Oh, I have a lot of friends who are moving to North Carolina, Tennessee.
Everybody's moving here.
I know.
Awesome. All right. Well, we are about 5 past the hour, so let's go ahead and get started. Thank you to everyone who has joined us for today's National Entrepreneurship Week event. The title is IP and Experiential Learning for Today's Entrepreneurs. And today I'm joined by my friends Carrie and Pam. They are Michelson Entrepreneurs in Residence. So we'll get into that just a second. So just some housekeeping before we get started. If you have some technical questions or you need support, just change the chat to hosts and panelists. That way I will make sure that we get it seen and that you get some help. But if you wanted to chat with everybody, just change that to everyone. Now, if you have questions, do use that Q&A option in the menu bar. And then we do not have any polls today, but yesterday we did some, so those will pop up through the polling menu bar option. So jumping in, like I said, I'm joined by the Michelson Institute for Intellectual Property. Now, intellectual property, or IP, refers to that intangible creation of the mind. So in today's economy, it is critically important for inspiring entrepreneurs, inventors, and makers to understand how to leverage IP rights. That means managing the protection, sharing, and commercialization of their ideas and creative work. I'm happy to share that Michelson IP resources have been used at over 80 NACCE schools. And so that is something really exciting that we can share throughout the community. If you're not a NACCE member, you do need to be a NACCE member to access that. And so it's a really great place to get plugged in and to utilize those tools and resources. So we do have 6 EIRs, entrepreneurs in residence. I'm joined by 2 of them, like I shared, Gary and Pam. But before we hop into talking with them and kind of unpacking some of that intellectual property information, I did also want to just circle us back to experiential learning, and that's something that we are talking about today, but it's also a really big conversation, I'm sure, for everyone talking about that on their campuses and with their colleagues. Gary and Pam, do you guys have conversations? Do you hear that phrase floating around your campuses as well? You do.
Yes, for at least at Thornton College, this is one of the big things we've been talking about. Most of you are probably also being involved in guided pathways at your campus. That's, experiential learning has become one of the buzzwords for engaging students and getting them to connect and participate. And some are even, at least on our campus, seem to think that this may be the path, to keeping students here so they don't go away.
Yeah. So just kind of unpacking, what is experiential learning? It's an engaged learning process where you learn by doing and then by reflecting on the experience. It's the process of learning that invites you to understand yourself as a learner and then empowers you to take charge of your own learning and development. And I think this is important for learners and the students that we're teaching, but also for ourselves as our personal, professional development and learning journeys continue. So kind of running through, what experiential learning contains. It typically contains the following elements. So reflection, critical analysis, and synthesis, opportunities for students to take initiative, make decisions, and be accountable for the results, opportunities for them to engage intellectually, creatively, emotionally, socially, or physically. And then it's a design learning experience that includes the possibility to learn from natural consequences, mistakes, and successes. So understanding experiential learning, and I think this conversation is so important, and bringing it back to intellectual property. So just kind of refreshing everybody on here. IP is that intangible creation of the mind. And so in IP and experiential learning, I feel like is so intertwined because we're saying, hey, let's do some self-reflection. Let's use your creativity to help you learn better. But then you also have that IP portion. And so that's where I want to kind of bring in Gary and Pam to talk a little bit about what is IP and how we kind of intermix those and navigate this new world. So before we get started in that conversation, Pam, will you introduce yourself, what you do, what school you're with?
Sure, great, thank you. Hi, I'm Pam Bogdan. I'm a college lecturer too, and the program chair at Ocean County College in New Jersey for the engineering and industrial/technical studies program. Wait, there's a mouthful for you. Prior to joining OCC in 2018, I had a 32-year career starting at Bell Laboratories and working all around and all over the place within AT&T. And so having my very first roots in a research and development organization such as Bell Laboratories, where intellectual property was created on a daily basis. I've leveraged that and brought that into the classroom and into the engineering and technology programs that we run. I just want to go back a step. We were talking about experiential learning. In the programs that I run, we not only look to include experiential learning, which folks have documented is a key strategy component for retention. So if you're trying to increase your retention rates, there is lots of research that shows experiential learning is a wonderful way to do that. But also in my area, because I'm in the CTE area, we also have work-based learning. And so really for me, experiential learning and work-based learning are almost synonymous in the world that I sort of live in.
Awesome, thank you. And Gary, we got a peek into your background earlier as we were getting started, but if you'll just introduce yourself as well.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Gary Graves. I am a professor of business and entrepreneurship at Thornton College, which is in Orange County, California. I teach a lot of classes. I teach entrepreneurship. I teach e-commerce. I teach what is Creativity Matters class. I'm always bringing in, new types of classes that I think are interesting. One of the most recent classes that we just got started delivering to students is the business of cannabis. Cannabis is a brand new industry in California. It's not for everybody. Even the topic's not for everybody, but new industries are rare, and so I like to be right there in the front of things, and so that's kind of been one of my latest endeavors, is kind of doing in that. Before teaching, I've been teaching probably close to I guess 18 or so years, on and off. I'm full time for the last 9 years, but before that, I owned an advertising agency where I worked with credit unions, insurance companies, more on the financial side, but also local nonprofits and things. IP was always a big topic. We were always trademarking, names of things and various components to protect, competition. And so I'm a big fan of experiential learning. I don't have a lot of tests or exams in my classrooms. I do believe that learning by doing is the best way. And so, so in my entrepreneurship class, you're building a business from day one. You are building, you're having to at least go through the routine of answering all the important questions so that you've got the experience. And IP is definitely a piece of that. And we a lot of times get students who, don't want to be, don't want to share their idea, and so it's kind of an interesting way to kind of, position things, but how you protect things even in the classroom.
Yeah. So playing on, kind of coming off of that thread, students who don't want to share their idea. So I would love to know, kind of in your own words, what is intellectual property? We know, it's the intangible creation of the mind, but kind of real world situations where you go, hey, that's IP, and maybe some things to help people wrap their mind around identifying what IP is in their everyday.
But what I tell my students is that they are thought workers. They're investing a significant amount of time and dollars to expand their thoughts and their understanding and knowledge. And we are in an economy, in a world that appreciates design, it appreciates intellectual creation. And so really, if you're thinking it's potentially IP, or probably is IP. And that it's not just the intangible anymore. IP and those thoughts are now, they're sellable goods. And I think they have to look at it from that perspective and protecting that. You wouldn't buy a car and not lock it so that somebody can't drive it away. And the same thing has to happen for these kinds of items as well.
It's sort of the same thing for me. I kind of position IP as a moneymaker. That ideas matter, and that and think about the electric car market right now. I'm a big fan of Elon Musk and Tesla. They own a lot of patents. They own a lot of trademarks, and those are protectable items, so that people can't just directly copy something that you've put out there. That someone could easily buy a Tesla, take it apart, figure out how everything works, but in that next version, they're going to have to modify it in order for it to be different. And that's a big piece of how you protect what you've created, so that you can hold others from doing the same thing. It's not gonna stop the idea. There's more than one way to accomplish almost everything. But your idea has to belong to you. I love, in my classes, kind of bringing it back to the experiential learning. Right now we're walking through a project where we were building a model, in Fusion 360. We're exporting it. We're making a 3D model of it, right? And although I'm not filing, for IP protection, we're kind of walking through the process of each of those components to protect this product. And so it's, so that students can actually see that, here's my idea. Have you ever seen something like this? And whether it's yes or no, I can still say that this is something that, I can now sell, and I can protect it from others, creating the exact same, thing that I have.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, we think IP for so long is sort of the lock or the protection around it. Now realizing they're tangible assets. I was involved in mergers and acquisitions work for a little while in my previous career. And when you've valued a company, their patents and other IP content actually was added onto the balance sheet, no different than the buildings and the equipment and other things that they had too. So again, it has real monetary value to it.
So I am going to jump over. Katie has a really great question in the chat. She said, for a very small or new entrepreneur, the cost of trademarking everything they need to protect can be huge. How do they create an IP strategy to decide on what to protect and when? So I would love to know kind of your opinions there.
Well, trademarking is an interesting one, and Gary can speak to the more details, but trademarking sort of has levels in terms of local and larger scale trademarking. Local trademarking is free. And so you want to put that TM on there right away and declare it. It's when you start to go up against others, or you start to have a more global impact, then that's when the money starts to do. But right away, you get it for free, and you should really apply those things.
And I never require a student to invest money in trademark or trademark is one of the simplest things that you can file. And there are some instant protections. And if you want to do more, one of the first things I learned, I think, when I was working for a credit union in industry, and we were coming up with a new product name. And it was interesting because we were doing business in California, but we wanted to do business in other states. And the lawyer we were working with, this is kind of my first introduction to really understanding IP, was, well, we need to mail something to someone, in another state like Florida. And so, and then have them keep that or send it back to us so we can see the postmark. So now it's traveled across states, right? And that starts the process of that intellectual property protection. But students can easily walk through the process themselves. The website set up by the United States Patent Office, makes it easy and Trademark Office to see everything and see the forms and see the costs. It's actually relatively pretty inexpensive. When we get into patent protection, that's where things can become they become more expensive, and you probably do need a patent attorney to help you with that.
Awesome, thank you. So, question that popped up for me is, for somebody who thinks that maybe IP is not something they need to consider, maybe they're an English educator, or they're not, working with people who are inventing things. What would you say to them as far as their need to understand IP and how to address it with their learners and how to support their learners in that area?
So I think, many times people, when they think IP, they sort of immediately think things like patents, right? But we also need to think about copyrights, and we also need to think about licensing, because open software development, and now even just for us academics, we're doing a lot of open educational resource, which is using the same sort of models. That's going to be a commerce model for a lot of things, where there is communal development and communal sharing of it. And I think all of those things need to be understood. I don't want to harp on it, but it really is important to say that it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's I'm writing a poem to, developing new electronics. It's coming out of here, and it needs to be protected as an asset.
Yeah, and the example I use in my classroom, when I owned my advertising agency, and we were full work, going full strong, I had an employee who decided they wanted to venture out on their own. So they took every one of our clients' logos, some of the work that we produced and they put them on a website. And I'm all for helping people get started on their own business. I don't want to prevent that, but stealing, I consider that stealing, by doing that. They weren't the employees' clients, they were my clients. The work that we produced belonged to my company. They didn't belong to the employee. And so the employee thought because they touched it and worked on it, they could claim it as their own. And that's not true. So that was one of those things where it's like, no, I need to protect what I own. I worked hard for all those clients, all of our work, and so when we got into the nitty gritty, it was interesting because, the letter I sent, was basically a cease and desist. Otherwise, you could be liable for $750,000 per incident. And when you start to see the kind of the value, and okay, so, let's just say there were 50 logos, on this website, that's a lot of money that somebody could owe if you took them to court. Of course, things, quickly went away and all of that, in the end, and we ended up helping the employee, get to become an actual entrepreneur themselves later. But those are things that people don't know. And particularly students that work places, I try and stress about, you work for someone, you don't own anything, that they have. And that's sometimes hard for people to understand because they think because they're doing it, they own it too. So.
Great. So as an educator in residence, I'm curious to know what resources are available to self-educate on IP, but then also to utilize in the classroom or on campus. So could you talk a little bit about what's available? And then I'm going to bring in my friend Rochelle from Michelson to talk a little bit more.
So, and Rochelle's going to do a much better job at this than I will. But I use all the stuff from Michelson. They've got textbooks, they've got websites, they've got all the activities, they've got everything that you can bring in to your learning management system, and all the resources that you need. And there's lots of activities, whether it's just a one-day event or it's something that you want all semester long, or even just a module. Like in most cases, like in my entrepreneur and e-commerce classes, there's a module where we spend 2 weeks dedicated to this topic. But this topic is a thread throughout the entire course. To show the importance and the value. So that's one resource. But again, I'm gonna get this wrong. The United States Patent and Trademark Office website is also very good. And to see that, this is our government in action, the things that they have set up and that have been around for a long time. This is not a new concept, it's been in America around since the 1600s. So it's, this isn't something, a new topic. It's just a new topic to the students that are learning about it.
Let me kind of thread on that question for you, Pam. What is something that you're maybe using right now, whether it's an online module or a textbook, something like that?
So I have 2 key things that I do because I really introduce IP at sort of the awareness level. I always kick off any of my design, engineering and technology design projects with, hey, this is IP and these are the 4 components. And there's really great videos, just really, introductory videos, as well as the OER textbook that was jointly developed with OpenStax. Just phenomenal entry-level items. And I use those both in my class, as well as we do a lot of outreach to K through 12 in the county that we serve. And I use it for those. So it's really accessible across the board, both for the youngsters and the others. And then another one that I use that I've done actually with Rochelle a number of times is there's an exercise or a set of materials that are IP scenarios that they have developed that really make a very good interactive session. Again, to get people thinking about what is intellectual property. We've used that for general audiences. We have a Wednesdays with STEM speaker series that's to the general public of both our students and the county. And I've also used it with maker spaces as well.
Incredible. Thank you so much. Well, thank you, Pam and Gary, for sharing some of your insights. So I'm going to turn it over to Rochelle to talk a little bit more about what is available. So I have her information up there. If you are in the audience, grab her email address. So that way, if you wanted or needed to follow up, you have it. I'll show it again at the end, but Rochelle, take it away.
Thanks so much, Erica, and thank you to Gary and Pam, who've been really integral parts of our IP Educator in Residence program. I'm going to take a moment here to just do a quick demo of our resource hub. So as Erica has put up there, we have several free and open licensed resources through our resource hub on our website. And they, as was mentioned before, we have course modules, video series, a textbook on an online course. So let me see if I can share my screen. And so here we go. So this is our website, michelsonip.com. And as we said, we have a suite of free digital resources that consists of our resource hub, which is kind of the overall sort of library of educational resources. We have our flagship digital textbook. We have our animated video series, a series of short videos, and we have a free online course on Udemy. So when you come to our website, you'll notice those resources, and the resource hub, as we kind of talked about earlier here, is where you'll find many of these things and materials that were mentioned today, all available here. So course modules, slide presentations, digital IP textbook. In the spirit of sort of learning activities, we do have an experiential learning activity here. So IP in action, water bottle activity that can be done both virtual and in person. And so this kind of challenges students with a lot of IP strategy and to think around, creating a water bottle brand and what that would mean and bringing that to market and the IP that you would need to do that. It's actually a really great activity that we tested out with our K through 12 audience. Think about in 2020 when we had an IP week, and the students there actually really enjoyed it. And it might be a really great way just to get students engaged, especially if it's for a younger audience. Another one of our resources is, as was mentioned before, our course modules. So when you click on one of our course modules, we have Blackboard and Canvas course modules, and we have full, light, and ultralight. So for different volumes of materials that you might need, depending on what your needs are, we kind of have that for you. And all you would do is kind of, fill out short form, and you would be able to download that. Moving on here, we also have our online course, as I mentioned earlier. And this is a free online course that we put up on Udemy. And so it really goes through the whole entire curriculum. It can be kind of completed in about 3.5 hours of work. And we actually just entered into a partnership within the last year with the National Academy of Inventors. So students who actually complete this online course will now be eligible to receive a course certificate from the National Academy of Inventors. So once they finish the course, they'll be able to access a last sort of final exam based on everything that they learned, and then they can also receive a certificate. So that's kind of where we're going with that as well, sort of enabling there to be some sort of credential effect that kind of adds on to the experiential learning process of learning IP. And was also mentioned as well, we do have a digital textbook also available for free through OpenStax, which is a great provider of free textbooks. So this, obviously you could just take this page if you're incorporating our textbook into your curriculum. All you'd have to do is grab this link, put it in your syllabus. And students can just kind of come here and download the book for free. And it's compatible with all devices, Kindles, interactive ebook, PDFs. So again, very accessible for students. And to close, I do want to maybe play sort of a video here that kind of encapsulates a lot of everything that we discussed here today, and kind of outlines the importance of IP. So hopefully you guys will be able to hear it. Let me see if I can click play.
This is Vaughn. He's a student studying psychology and a world-class baker. All his friends and fellow classmates love his secret family recipe, dollar chip cookies. he began to package and sell the cookies on campus with a catchy slogan, "A warm bite of home." Due to popular demand, Vaughn ended up with a real business on his hands. This is Janet. She is also a student, majoring in mathematics, and she loves active outdoor activities like running, hiking, and biking. One day, she sketches an idea for a novel sustainable wearable that keeps her in exercise mode when she can't make it to the great outdoors. After building a prototype using her school's Maker Lab, testing it with her friends, and researching manufacturing options, Janet realized that she's now an inventor. This is Matthias. He's a lifelong craftsman taking evening classes at his local community college to build his business and entrepreneurship skills. After researching competitors, his new business plan is to convert vintage fabrics into beautiful tote bags. Soon, Matthias launches an online shop complete with a trendy logo. Vaughn, Janet, and Matthias's stories touch on 4 types of intellectual property, or IP. What is intellectual property? Simply put, it is any intangible creation of the mind and is essential to business and creative endeavors. The Michelson Institute for Intellectual Property is a nonprofit initiative with a free curriculum, resources, and network of experts to help with your IP education needs. Join our growing community of educators and learners on the journey to creatorship today at michelsonip.com/start here.
Right. So yeah, that's kind of our website, and hopefully you'll get a chance to sort of discover on your own, and that really helps to sort of encapsulate what our mission is as far as intellectual property education for all. And we're happy to be partnering with NACCE and our educators at the community colleges to really be champions for IP education. And so yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you so much. So I posted this in the chat, and this is where I want everyone in the room to engage with us, join us back in the chat. I can allow you to talk, so if you would like to talk, just put it in the chat and I'll give you that privilege. But I'm curious from your perspective, Karen, Kevin, Merle, from all of your perspectives, now that you have a better understanding of intellectual property and experiential learning, how might you start thinking about it or identifying it within your classroom, with your learners, maybe fellow colleagues on campus? What does that look like? Maybe something that you'll take away and say, as you go into the classroom, hey, that's IP. So post that in the chat. I'm curious to know what you think. Gary and Pam, while they're putting those replies in there, what are maybe some last thoughts or tips, things that you've learned along the way that you would like to share?
I think a couple of things. One is, oh my gosh, there are just amazing resources available from Michelson. Both the resources that they post that are constantly being refreshed, and they are pushing the envelope on new partnerships and new ways to deliver the material. So absolutely, go once, but keep going on a regular basis. And the other is, IP is not inventing the light bulb. It is you created something that met a need, whether it's a design need or a functional need or some other need. And I think just about every discipline, every academic school is doing something that's going to meet a need. And so everybody's creating IP.
Yep. I love what Merle put in there. She said, when innovations are just an idea in that stage and they're not quite tangible yet, IP gets put on the back burner. Do you guys feel that way? And how do you overcome it?
Well, in the classroom, I mean, it's easy enough to have the conversation, that gets students, talking about this. But I would say, if you're an educator, you're wanting to bring IP into the classroom, I think one of the very first things, if you're not confident about, the language, the terms, the rules, the pricing, take the course, that's offered through Michelson through Udemy, and that's a great place to start so that you're prepared. But don't think you have to roll up everything at once. You know, I tend to focus, you know, my teaching around artists, and so because I mean, there's a million disciplines and industries out there, but my interests revolve around the art world, and so that's where I use most of my examples. That's where you know, I tend to keep my interest as well, because you want to, I know everybody wants to teach stuff that they love, and so this is one way to adapt it so that it's something that you can you know, participate and continue to learn. The other great tool that you might want to consider is if your library has access to the Wall Street Journal. You know, there are always the best articles about intellectual property in, you know, from that paper. And so I always recommend, you know, follow that topic, you know, in the Wall Street Journal. That way you can bring those things into the classroom to talk about, you know, to see, you know, what happened. There's lots of, you know, intellectual properties that have been protected that are also now becoming available. And so you hear about that on the news. You know, that's why we see, you know, like you see a lot of even artists, you know, their works being recreated on T-shirts in different places. You're like, hey, how are they able to do that? And a lot of it's because those works are now out of intellectual property protection. And so that also creates new opportunities for students to think about their own ideas as well and what they can use too.
And I think another one we haven't mentioned is the social boards that NACCE has. It's always great to just bounce ideas off of other people, and there's really wonderful community boards that are available through NACCE to have those conversations as well.
Yep, I love, Katie, what you posted in there about assigning readings so that they can have worksheets to complete on the thing that they will create, and if it's worth protecting. So Kevin, you posted in the chat, aligning the business itself to the thoughts and idea of IP. And I wanted to know if maybe you could expand on that. So I gave you the option to turn on your microphone if you wanted to, because I'm not quite sure I understand. And I don't know if Pam or Gary, if that makes sense to you about aligning the business itself to the thoughts of IP.
Yes, can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Yeah, I was switching that out. Thank you. Yeah, so, you know, I teach in Entrepreneurship Studies Institute at Anne Arundel Community College, and we get all these different, you know, ideas of businesses, and you know, whether it's a service or a product. And one of my initial things that I do is I challenge my students, if it's a service, come up with a product. If it's a product, what can be a service? And I believe to what, you know, Gary just said, you know, you see all these different things that are out there that, you know, individuals see and like, oh, how did you get it there? Well, it's that abstract thinking that gets it there. And this right here now comes to say, okay, you know, that saying you walk around and you say all the time, or that other thing that you do, how can we now associate that to IP? How can you just think differently on that, so that as you know, you're moving it forward, and I want to sell this product, but then all of a sudden that product can emerge something that can fall within this IP category.
Yeah, and I think, Kevin, to sort of follow along on that is, you had talked about sort of a mindset change. And I know when I was a technical manager trying to encourage my software developers to create patent disclosures, that it was like pulling teeth in the beginning, because they are like, well, but I didn't create, you know, I didn't invent the next light bulb. I said, but you did create something that solved a real business problem. And it's sort of a cultural mindset change that says intellectual property is not that ultimate 1%. It's really the other 90, it's really 99% now. And it's sort of that shift that has to happen, no different than in other industries that are becoming, going from paper and pencil to having to use electronics. That was a big shift. Well, this is another shift that says, yeah, businesses have to consider IP as more of a core asset than just a unique occurrence.
Well, thank you so much. So I'm going to throw this back up here. So Rochelle's email address is on there if you wanted to reach out. But then also on the NACCE front, you can access all of the resources right there and fill out a form to get access to it, as well as other information. So thank you again to Pam, Gary, and Rochelle for joining us for today's National Entrepreneurship Week event. I do want to invite everyone to join us tomorrow at noon Eastern Time for Advancing Equity, Navigating the New Terrain, and we'll be joined by our friends from VentureWell. They have just put out a really great report about all of this and digging into the details. So please do make plans to join us tomorrow. And again, thank you to our panelists as well as everyone that joined us for today's event. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hi, thank you.